What's up, everybody? Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be discussing variables in Go. Specifically, what are variables? How do we use them? How do we initialize them? How does it look in the code? We're going to go over constants and even some best practices along variables. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's start by answering the biggest question at hand. What is a variable? So think about it like this. Every computer program needs to be able to store data in memory. That data is then stored at a specific spot in the memory. So a variable is a nice name given to that memory location where the data is being stored. Pretty simple, right? Another way to think of variables would be to think of them as containers. They simply hold information and they give us a descriptive label so that we can easily use that throughout the rest of our program. Alongside its name, every variable would also have a data type. Now, a data type is simply a way of categorizing that data, telling us how we should store that data, the operations that we can do on that data, and the range of values that that data can possibly hold. A data type is simply an attribute associated with a piece of data that will tell the computer system how to interpret its value. In Go, you have three basic data types. The first one is bool, which stands for a Boolean type value, which can be true or false. The second one is a number type, which can be an integer, float, or a complex type. And three, you have string, which represents string values. For the sake of this video, we won't really be going in too much depth on the specifics of each of the data types I mentioned, but it's very good just to know the basic data types that GoLang supports. In GoLang, there are two different ways to declare a variable. The first one is using the var keyword followed by the name of the variable, of course, and the value. In this case, you can either declare the type or the value or both. The second way to declare a variable in GoLang is using the := symbol. In this form of declaration, the type is inferred from what the value you give it. So you have to give this variable a value. You can't leave it blank because that's the only way that the compiler can infer what type of data that your variable will be. What's the difference between the var keyword and the := symbol in GoLang? Well, you already know one. For the := symbol, you have to have the value. You can't just declare it without a value. It needs to have a value. However, with the var keyword, you don't need a value at the time of declaration. You can simply just state your variable name and the type and leave it be, and then set your value at a later time in the code. Another difference between the two is that the var keyword can be used inside and outside of functions, meaning that you can declare a variable outside of a function and still have access to that value of the variable inside of a function. Whereas with the := symbol, you do not have access outside the function, so you have to declare it only inside a function where you can use it. Now let's look at a few examples in the code. You can see here on my screen that I already have a few different examples already pre-typed out. So let's go ahead and start with the first one. Remember that we have two ways to declare a variable in GoLang. So this is the first way, using the var keyword with our variable name, first name, and the type and the value. However, some cases you may not even need to use the type. That just depends on your use case. So I can declare a variable name without saying it's a string type and just put cam, and the compiler will already understand that it's going to be a string data type. I'm only getting this red underline here because I'm not using the variable. That's just my IDE. The second way that we can declare a variable, as we stated earlier, is using the := symbol. Notice how the var keyword is omitted right here. But we have to have a value. Whenever we use this method of declaring a variable, we need to have a value. Moving on to our next example. You can see here that we have a variable being set C as a Boolean type, but we don't have a value at the time of our declaration right here. So by default, GoLang will set this to be false because that's the default type or the default value for a Boolean value with no value upon declaration. However, If we want to set it later in the code, we can. So you can see here, we're saying originally C is just going to be empty, meaning it's going to be false. But here we can set it to true later on in the code and get no issue. We can't do this with the := This is one of the bigger differences between the two. In GoLang, you can also declare multiple variables on the same line. So as you notice here, we have a var keyword and we're declaring multiple variables of string type. So we have first, second, third, and fourth as our variable names. They're all going to be given a type string, and you can see here their values are first, second, third, and fourth, keeping it simple. However, if I wanted to change this value to a different data type, such as a number, you can see here we're going to get an error just because we've had our data type coded to be string. So it's going to say, hey, what are you doing? You cannot put a number on a string type. But you can also declare multiple variables without hard typing the type. So if we remove the string value right here for the type, notice how the error goes away. The compiler will automatically determine, hey, this is going to be 3 strings and an integer number type. So that's another cool way that you can do multiple variable declarations. You can also do multiple variable declarations using this method by the group method, and you can say x type int equals 8. Well, I already have x declared, so let's say test. Moving on, we can say last, and we're going to give this a value of bool, and we're going to say that's true. And we can say what? Names, since I already used the word name. Name of type string, and we're going to say name. And we're only getting these errors because we aren't using the variables. So that's another way that you can declare multiple variables in GoLang. Let's talk about naming conventions in GoLang. So as you saw, your variable names can be short, such as X and Y, or they can be longer and more descriptive, such as first name, last name, depending on how you see fit. Your variable names must start with an underscore or a letter. They cannot start with a number. Variable names can be as long as you would like, but they cannot contain spaces. They can only contain alphanumeric characters such as letters, underscores, and numbers. Variable names are also case sensitive, and you cannot use any keywords in your variable name. Typically your IDE will pick this up, but that's something just to be wary of when you're developing. Here are a few techniques you can use when you have long descriptive variable names, just so your code can be more readable for you and for those who you may be coding alongside. The first technique is camel case. In this technique, every word except for the first word begins with a capital letter. The second technique to use would be Pascal case. In this technique, every word begins with a capital letter. The last technique is snake case. In this technique, each word is separated by an underscore. Now let's talk about constants in GoLang. A constant in GoLang is, as the name suggests, it's a constant value that cannot be changed. So if you have a value that you would like to remain the same and static in your code, you would declare it as a constant. Variables that are declared as constant follow the same rules as variables declared using the var keyword in GoLang. The only difference is constants are unchangeable, they're read-only. Let's check out some examples of constants in the code base. So like before, I already have some pre-typed examples. You can see here we're going to start with example 1, which is an untyped constant. So you can see instead of using the var keyword, we're using the keyword const, and we're following the same convention as we did before with a variable name and a value in this case. Since we're doing an untyped constant, we're not specifying that this is a type integer. We're letting our compiler determine that. Moving on to the next example, we can see that we are using a type that we specify, which is integer for current year 2023. Constants follow the same rules as variables, with the only difference being that they are read-only and they cannot be modified. So this is very useful if you want to have some constant data that you don't want to be changed in your code. As far as multiple declarations, it follows the same rules as the var declarations. Instead, we're just replacing var with const. You can see here We can specify the type, or we cannot, leaving it empty and let the compiler do the work for us. Let's quickly show what would happen if we attempt to modify a constant value or change it. So you can see here we have birth year already declared at the top of our code. So let's do it on the next line just so it can be easier to see. Let's try to change this value to 1996. You can see we're going to get an error saying, hey, you cannot assign this because it's a constant. So that's simply what would happen if you try to change a constant value. So that's Go variables and constants in a nutshell. I hope you learned a lot through this basic tutorial. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and don't forget, like and subscribe. More videos are coming soon. Peace out.